Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation, a Stranger Things podcast. This is part 2 of our discussion on the Hellfire Club, picking up right where we left off. So I think the best place to start with the Hawkins group is going to be Steve and Robin. The scene of them in the car, I think, was probably the first standout moment of the episode for me. Like, that was when I felt like I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. We're finally back. I mean, no surprise. I mean, Steve is my favorite character. He's a lot of people's favorite character. And then, like, I remember, like, this was one of the things I was looking forward to a lot, was seeing how what is this dynamic going to look like? Yeah. So it was, like, great to get this, like moment of just the two of them. Mm-hmm. Like, it wasn't, we didn't get them, like, in a big group. It was like, no, we're going to get just them by themselves at first. Yeah, liking that. And you get a name drop.
I remember the first time we watched it, because my name is I mean, it's not unheard of, but it's not common. Mm-hmm. So the first time we watched the episode, and he's like, well, the problem with Heidi, and I was like, what? Yeah. And I think I turned to you to be like, my name, but I think, like, you hadn't caught it.
No, I hadn't caught it, because I think I was like, oh, Steve and Robin. But you went, what did he just say? That was what you said.
Okay.
Which I thought was hilarious. And I was like, wait, what? Yeah. Which is amazing because he says it twice.
Yeah.
I don't know how I missed it. Yeah. But no, I like it because it means both of our names are in the show. Yeah. Although he brings Brenda, not Heidi.
And then he lives to regret it, doesn't he?
He sure does. Yeah.
That's what happens.
It makes for it's entertaining, at least.
Oh, it's incredibly comedic, yeah.
I feel bad for him, but I'm also like, well, it's funny to watch.
Yeah.
It's not painful. Like, it doesn't feel like...
I mean, we've all been on a date that, like, somebody says something awkward and you're like, yeah, okay,
Yeah. The thing that she says to him, though, about how it must be weird to, like, have left right before we go to the championships, and he's like, like... While it is funny and comedic and entertaining, all the things we just said, I will also add to that in a way it was also, like, bizarrely validating, because up until season 4, I remember throughout the podcast, I had been under this impression that Steve had been on the basketball team, that he was an athlete. I mean, I've said it, like, he's a jock, he was on the team, but I don't remember when it was. It was sometime during season 3, I think, that I suddenly went, wait a minute, is he though? Because it occurred to me that all the times we've seen him playing basketball, it could have been for gym class.
Sure.
So it was like, well, he fits that stereotype personality, but was he actually on the team? So hearing this, I mean, granted, you could still maybe make the argument that this isn't about it being his team, but that just your school and you're into sports, like that it's that. But I'm gonna still I'm just deciding to, if it's not canon, then I'm headcanoning it that he was on the team. And then again, the exchange of not snark, but that exchange that Steve and Robin have, when Tammy Thompson comes out.
Yes.
That to me is actually a really great example of how to do fan service well, because it was such this little inside joke, and because it's not just, remember that thing? It was this moment from a really important moment between them. Yeah. And now they can laugh about it. Yeah. I don't know, because I think they have the reaction that we as the audience were having. Although I think I said to you when we watched this episode together for this, that I actually have to wonder if the actress actually can sing and she's singing badly on purpose.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And I also think that there was so much, like, feedback noise that was happening that I almost wondered if, like, in post-production, they were like, oh, she sounds way too good. Let's, like, add in a whole bunch of feedback so that she sounds worse. She didn't sound like Whitney Houston, but she didn't sound terrible either.
And I think the feedback noise helps, like, bleed into the electric guitar. Yeah. Which we will come back to that. But yeah. You're right, that they may have, like, amped it up a lot more than they may have needed to. Yeah. And at this point, I don't know. I don't necessarily know how to take Vicky. I certainly didn't when we watched the first time. Like, just in this episode, it's like, I don't know, but I mean, she seems cool.
Yeah. Honestly, that's kind of my reaction to Vicky throughout the season.
Mm-hmm. So I think kind of on that note, we'll shift to the kids and which are now teens, and that actually leads into, like, my first note here, which is that we get that track, the music track of Teens, which is the updated version of Kids, which I remember I noticed it when watching the episode specifically because of having been doing the podcast and having become a lot more familiar with the score than I was before doing the podcast, because I look through all of the score when I make those little audiograms for social media. So I recognized it more because that's like one of the most famous tracks that's on the Stranger Things soundtracks. So like to hear it, I was like, oh, they've updated it. And then I remember when they finally released the soundtrack, it took a long time. They released like the needle drops, like the playlist or whatever. But when they finally released the musical score, when I saw that it was called Teens, I was like, it warmed my heart. I like had a moment. It was really great.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's generally cool, I find, to see the kids in the high school settings, you know, to recognize the same spaces that we saw in the first 2 seasons. You know, I mean, in general, the change in location from season 3, at least how I felt about the change of location, it felt like such a breath of fresh air. And, you know, particularly, I love that epic oneer that starts at Hawkins High, that circles around the car to the bus where we catch up with Max when she's greeted by Miss Kelly. Like, that's just, I mean, it's been part of the cinematographic language. I've talked about it a lot, actually, on the podcast when I've called out that it's one long take. Like, they have a lot of them. So, but they really, I felt like they really kicked it up a notch this season. And I don't know why, but, well, I kind of know why. But I found that, like, when Mike and Nancy are trying to leave, it gave me season 2 vibes. Like, even though it's a very different interaction that they have in season 2, I don't know, just them interacting like that early on in the season just reminded me of that, and I liked that.
Some sibling dynamics never change.
Yep. And then Dustin's always a treasure.
Yes.
But the interaction with, well, I love the bit when he says to his mom, "Don't come in, I'm naked." That amused me. And then when Susie says, "Jiminy Cricket's Dusty," I was like, oh, hello, Batman reference.
Oh.
Like, Jiminy Cricket's Batman. Oh. Like, she's Robin to Dustin's Batman.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay.
Susie's so stinking cute. I'll repent later.
Yeah. And like here at the beginning, it was like in this episode, it was just enough. Like just a quick flash. They're still together.
Yeah.
Still up to shenanigans, the two of them. Cool. So before we get into like the other stuff with the kids, like Hellfire Club and the basketball game and all that stuff, I want to talk about Jason's speech.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit. We talked a lot about Jason in our reactions episodes, but this specific speech I want to dig into a little bit. Initially, you and I both had a very amused reaction to Jason, which I thought is hilarious in hindsight, because I remember you said 2 things that were really funny. The first was you said, "Oh, he's like my age." Like, you knew he was not age appropriate.
Yeah.
And then also you said, "Oh, well, he's going to be a senator."
Yeah, I said, "Here comes the senator."
Yes.
Yeah, or "Here comes the future senator."
Yes.
Like, one of the things that I think is really interesting about Jason as a character and as a performance is I was amused by him, but that amusement came from a very hostile place. Instantly, from like the second he comes on screen, I had this like white hot dislike of him. I think that comes from direction, it comes from the acting, it comes from the way that he behaves immediately. Like, by the time he gets to "Chrissy, I love you, babe," I'm already like, kill it with fire.
Well, not to mention that, and when he like makes a point to acknowledge her during the game, I made a joke when we watched it this time about like mine.
Yeah.
Mine.
Yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, that was remarkable insight for where his character goes. I mean, thinking about the town meeting that happens later on.
Oh, yeah. And the way that he, activates his goons to enact his personal revenge, but still somehow is able to have this public face of goodness and wholesomeness that is just completely rotten to the core. We find out even before everything goes wrong, he presents this side of himself as being this extremely wholesome boyfriend, but he then goes to a trashed restaurant and has keggers and stays out all night and gets up to all kind of shenanigans.
Well, and also, I mean, just the amount of power that he wields in this community. Which was funny though, because then you also said, again, when we were kind of talking about it leading up to this, you had said how, like, I think I made some sort of comment like, I can't imagine a kid making a speech like that in my high school. And then, you had said, oh, I can.
Yeah. Fun fact about me, I attended 3 different high schools in my 4 years, mostly because I moved around. But it was just interesting to me to see, like, sometimes students and sometimes teachers be like, oh, we're all so torn up about this terrible, terrible thing that happened. Let's make ourselves feel better with sports ball. And the reason that I remember that is because it was always so jarring to me. There was one incident where it had absolutely nothing to do with sports, and it was just a terrible, terrible thing that happened. But one of the students died in a car accident. And like literally there was a speech like, oh, like we lost our friend, we lost our community member. We're going to stand strong in this basketball game.
I mean, I kind of feel like the reason that works is because there's like a ring of truth to it in that idea of like, we're gonna continue we're gonna carry on.
Yeah.
We're gonna still be us. We're gonna still find some joy. But I think it gets taken a little far sometimes. But we're also not really sports people.
That's very true. Yeah.
I love though that Mike and Dustin are like just completely unimpressed with Jason. And also, like, kind of to quite literally underscore all of the points that you're making, I love the musical score under this scene. It's rousing and hella 80s, but with just the slightest sinister tinge underneath.
Yeah.
Which perfectly sums up Jason at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, of course, during that speech that the whole thing about the tournament comes to light. While I understand that, like, this is their final game, the other side of it is like you and I are now. So I've summoned you to the dark side. You now play D&D. We're in a campaign together, but we had actually just been talking with our party about the fact that trying to schedule our next game, like just a few days before we watched this episode, and it had come up that like, oh, somebody might have to be played, by the DM or by another player,
right.
Piloted by somebody else, and I at least in all the circles that I play, and I'm still like relatively new to D&D. Like I haven't been playing like since I was in high school, for example. But in all the circles that I've ever played D&D in, like that happens sometimes. Now, at the same time, to be fair, they're talking about the final session. That is a different thing. Like no, everybody needs to be present for that. The levels that you're at, the story that's involved. Like so, like I get that it's important. And it's not like, oh, they can just play without Lucas, like, or, Eddie could pilot that character or one of them could. Like, I understand why that's not an option.
Well, I don't know that I don't know that Lucas would want Eddie piloting his character because apparently Eddie is a little bit of a hard-ass DM.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, I don't know when that concept even entered the lexicon of D&D. Maybe they didn't do that I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, but again, it's their final game. It makes sense that Lucas would be like, no, ask him to postpone. Like that is a very reasonable request.
We do that all the time.
We do that all the time. That all of that said, though, I really, really love the like sort of second half of that conversation. Like pretty much after Dustin says, please arrive at the point. And Lucas starts kind of getting super real with them. Like, I don't want to be nerds and freaks. And then like, we are nerds and freaks. And Lucas saying, look, it's been hard. And then the way the music comes in, like I love how that scene plays out. I like how earnest it is. I like how seriously the writing, like they took it seriously. They meaning the Duffers and the writing team. Like they didn't treat this, they didn't have this conversation be a joke or they didn't go for humor. They like really kind of got earnest. And it's hard, especially because we did the reaction episodes back when this first came out. I'm trying to kind of also get back into the headspace of where we were at when we watched this the first time. And the thing that I remember feeling, I didn't say this at the beginning of the beginning of our discussion, but I remember going into this episode feeling really apprehensive. Like, is this just going to be a bunch of jokes again? Are they going to treat this with a lot more comedy? Is this going to be that kind of surface level, wacky 80s comedy vibe, And, I mentioned the Stephen Robbins scene. As much as I love it, actually kind of plays more into that trope. But this scene doesn't. And I remember that was a huge relief because it felt like, okay, it felt like an indication that at least as far as like the relationships between this set of characters was concerned, they're going to take it seriously.
Yeah. Well, what I really like about this scene is it feels very authentic to where these people are in the course of their life, you know, entering into a new school, whether that's entering into middle school or entering into high school, is a time of self-reinvention. And Lucas is very much playing into that. Nobody's wrong in this conversation. And there are other conversations later in the season with Lucas that I have some feelings about because I think they did Lucas dirty. But in this scene, in this conversation, Lucas is saying, I want to try to make it easier for all of us. Like, I am doing the, you know, socially acceptable activity to make my social situation in high school easier. And if I do that and I'm successful, then that will make your social situation in high school easier. And what I love about this is it's so true to Lucas that even though he is trying to change and he is trying to make a difference, he's not doing it in such a way as he's not distancing himself from Mike and Dustin. He's not distancing himself from Max. Quite the opposite. He's trying to maintain the closeness in both cases. And he's not saying, yo, like, you know, we can play D&D at home, but let's not do it at school. He's not saying he wants out of Hellfire. And also, like, he's allowed to like basketball.
Absolutely.
I don't think he's necessarily doing the basketball thing just to try to be popular. I think he enjoys it and has talent for it. I mean, as we see, he absolutely has talent for it. And on the opposite side, you have Dustin and Mike who are like, to use a phrase that your mom uses that I really like, this is how the package came. I am a freak. I am a nerd. My priority is the D&D club called Hellfire. And so they're saying like, well, I understand that you want to make the social situation easier, but I'm never going to be able to do that because I don't play basketball. That's not something that I enjoy doing. I'm not going to be doing one of the socially accepted activities. I'm not a partier. I'm not XYZ. I'm going to be a quote unquote social outcast for the entirety of my high school career. And that's just how the cookie crumbles. And that's also, like, despite high school being a time of reinvention, there's also nothing wrong with saying, this is who I am and I like who I am. I'm not going to change just to try to fit in better.
Assimilate.
Yeah.
Well, but in a way, like, that almost speaks to, especially once we get to know Eddie, that also speaks to what I think is also very, very common and, like, you know, normal and fine of the teenage experience, which is they're leaning into the rebellion of it all.
Yeah.
I think that even if Lucas didn't necessarily like basketball in earnest, I don't think, I mean, kind of to what we were just talking about with the community aspect, I think the idea of, I mean, especially like as nerds ourselves, I think it's very, you know, the idea of like, hey, here's this thing that I enjoy that like, it's okay to like this. Yeah, I agree with you too. I love the way that they're both sides of this conversation are right. And I like that it's hard, it's upsetting, but in a good, like, narratively rewarding way.
Yeah.
That it's like, this is also just, when you grow apart and your community starts to split up. And it was kind of to your point too about that Lucas is not saying I want out of Hellfire. That was like, I think maybe an undercurrent of another reason that I loved all this so much, even the stuff later when he sees them leaving, because again, the way they treated D&D in season 3. And it was like, they could have so easily gone in the direction of Lucas being like, it's kid stuff anyway. It's stupid. Like, why did you guys go back to it? And they chose not to do that. And I'm so appreciative of that.
Yeah.
And then I just like the way that scene also concludes with the way that Dustin ends the scene with the delivery of shit. Like, it sounds so organic and it really just encompasses the moment. Like, this sucks, you know? And again, they could have ended with a joke and they didn't.
Yeah.
They ended in earnest. I know I said that the Stephen Robbins stuff was like my first standout. This was the scene where I was like, okay, I feel that I don't know that it lasted, but I felt like, okay, I feel like we're in good hands for this season. They're starting in a place that I can really get behind.
Yeah.
And that I will say that from my memory and my recollection, that feeling lasts for a while. I mean, all of the other arcs that we've already kind of complained about, notwithstanding, I felt like the Hawkins group is the group that is the most important and the most pivotal to the series. So in a way, it carries more weight, and especially because, like I said, of how much I feel like the stuff got bungled in season 3. This was a really, really rewarding and very relief-filled scene for me.
Yeah.
But talking of Max, we'll come back to Lucas. I think we briefly touched on it, but that transition from Elle to Max, where we get the first instance of running up that hill. You know, the way it ramps up under the shots as she passes Lucas. Like, the contrast of that scene, the stuff of Max and Lucas in slow motion to what that follows, being the scene in the classroom with Angela, like, the use of storytelling in this moment is so much more effective.
Yeah, it really is. I have questions about, like, when was that shot, and, like, who shot it, and, like, what was the California production. Like, I'm sure, like, I'm not suggesting that they were shooting in different locations. They could have been, but I have no idea. But, like, was it, like, what happened is kind of the question.
I mean, it may very well be that they were doing that whole, like, they're all in different genres things, and it just really, I mean, because that definitely shows up with some of the stuff later on that I think, like, I think the tonal imbalances throughout the season are part of that, are good. Yeah. But yeah. But yeah, I just, and watching it this time, it made me wonder that if this is also an indication that both Elle and Max are missing one another. You know, I mean, you talked a lot in season 1 about the value of the female friendship between Nancy and Barb. And even though I have, you know, a lot of mixed feelings about season 3, I do really, you know, particularly some of the stuff with Max and Elle at the beginning of that season, you know, the dump your ass scene in particular, I still really don't like that scene. But all of that aside, I really do love the friendship between them.
Yeah.
And I think that it is really valuable, which is almost one of the reasons that some of the stuff, that the way it's depicted in season 3 bothers me. So I like to interpret this scene, again, may not have been their intention, but especially with this being the transition, if we're meant to infer that, yeah, they're missing one another.
Oh, absolutely. I think they are.
And how that they had this female friendship that they now both have to go without.
Yeah.
I mean, considering that so much of that is in Max's montage of memories later on. And yeah, if that wasn't the intent, I choose to read it that way anyway. That's the parallel. And that leads to the scene that Max and Miss Kelly having their little kind of therapy session. So a bigger conversation for this, you know, the season as a whole is the inclusion of therapy and mental health. You know, I said we would touch on this when we got here. So, you know, Max is seeing the counselor. She's not a therapist. It's just the school's guidance counselor. I know that apparently, you know, like Ham Radio, for example, they have some theories about Miss Kelly. I'm not going to touch on that because that was something that hadn't even occurred to me until I heard them say it. So I'm going to stay away from that. But the fact that this scene exists in the show brings the subject of mental health and therapy to light. So why is no one else getting this sort of attention? I mean, because it totally makes sense to me that, like, Max just lost her stepbrother, death in the family. Of course she'd need to see the guidance counselor. That makes sense. But Will almost died 2 years in a row, including abduction and possession. The previous year, he almost came face to face with the same creature that took him, but in a new, more horrific form. But no therapy for him. I mean, you mentioned as regards Elle, what if they could find her a lab-approved counselor to talk to? Same thing, same question for Will, you know? Because, like, it's the idea of him we're just expecting him to be totally well-adjusted with no trauma, you know? And again, yeah, like you said, the same for Elle. Like, she's lived an incredibly abnormal life. Just comparing her to Max, she also lost a family member last year. She lost her father. You know, but again, she's supposed to just go to school without any sort of attention paid to her emotional well-being. Like, it's weird. And I could buy it a lot more easily that, if this wasn't happening.
Right.
So that's the only reason that I even mention the Miss Kelly theories, because in some ways I almost kind of hope that there is something odd with her. I'm not even gonna just to kind of promote ham radio, throw them some love. I'm gonna say, if you're interested to hear what their theory is, and you're not aware of it just through the fandom, go check out their podcast. But basically just that there's a Vecna connection there. I don't necessarily subscribe to that theory, but in a way I almost kind of hope that's true, because then it would mean that there's a reason why this is like unusual and why this is here but it's not anywhere else.
Okay.
But I don't actually think that that's the case.
No, I don't either. I mean, I'm a big believer in the helpful power of therapy. Nobody can be forced to benefit from any kind of therapeutic intervention. You have to choose to seek therapy, and then you have to find the kind of therapy that's right for you and the kind of, the therapist that's right for you and so on. But I very, very much wish that like everybody in the Byers household had access to therapy. I mean, think of everything that Joyce has been through.
Seriously.
Like, her child was abducted.
Twice.
And she lost her lover twice.
And she was just a single mom raising 2 kids before that.
And her husband was a piece of shit. So, like, absolutely she needs therapy.
Yeah.
Also,
Jonathan.
And Jonathan absolutely needs therapy. He might need less weed if he had more therapy. So, therapy all around. What I found very interesting about the conversation between Max and Miss Kelly was I could relate to it. Especially when I was in middle school, there was a time when things were not going super great at home. And I ended up having some conversations that mirrored that conversation a little bit. Like, how are things going? Fine. And from Max's perspective, Miss Kelly can do fuck all for her. She can't prescribe medication. She can't do anything about Max's mom's mental state. She can't give them money. There's nothing that Miss Kelly can do that can actually help her.
Well, and she's clearly not like a trusted enough person.
Right.
That Max can actually express some of the shame and guilt that she feels.
Yeah, she can't tell her what actually happened. She can't tell her, I watched Billy sacrifice himself to the mind flayer. Or the, whatever, what do they call the blob monster?
The meat. I mean, I like blob monster personally, but the meat flare. Yeah. Yep. The meat flare.
I mean, she can say, I watched Billy die, but she can't say how.
Yeah.
I'm sure she does not feel prepared to get into the whole, like, we hated each other before that. He
was abusive.
Yeah. But also what I love as an adult watching this scene is how much I feel for Miss Kelly, because Miss Kelly also knows there is precious little that she can do to help Max, and yet she's also in a position where there's so much that she could do that would hurt Max, because if Max reveals something to her that indicates that child services need to intervene, like she's legally bound to report things to Child Protective Services. So if Max started talking about how much that her mom was drinking excessively, then she would have to report that. And that would end up bringing even more instability into Max's life. And then, so you have to like so both of them are kind of playing chess. And it's just so sad because in my reading, Miss Kelly just wants to help. Like, she took this job because she wanted to do a good job. To me, that's the energy that I get from her. I love the performance.
Me too.
Yeah, like I think that whole scene is so well shot and so well acted. It's great. Like, the two of them have phenomenal chemistry.
Yeah, I agree with you. The performance by Regina Ting Chen is fantastic. She's great. So I hope she's not working with Vecna, because I genuinely liked her also.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for different reasons, I also related to this scene. Like, even though, like this is supposed to be, we're roughly a year out from when the events happened and Max is still struggling so much. But in some ways, it's like yeah, like I was not in a place to be able to process my grief because of the circumstances, you know, and I think that was true for a lot of people. So what I feel like in general, the way they handle grief specifically, except for when they don't show characters dealing with it at all, I feel like across the board in I mean, and again, I'm not going near the ending just yet.
Yeah.
That aside, everything kind of up until the season finale, I'll put it that way. I really like how this season handles grief, like a lot. Again, it's not like it's pleasant to watch. It's not like it's enjoyable to watch, but I like how it's done because it feels pretty accurate, at least from my experience and from the experience I've heard from people around me, you know, including you.
Yeah.
But because the scene is done so well, I'm kind of like, I want this for Will and Elle too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then, of course, after that scene with the two of them, we get the scene between Lucas and Max in the hall. So Jenna and I very much disagreed on this scene. Like, and it makes me wonder if this was shot earlier, like before their big pause, and they were younger when they shot this. I don't have as good of a detector of like when they're older, although some of what I've noticed has been accurate from what I've seen from production stills, but he seems to be younger, and like his literally like his body language, his blocking feels more like Lucas as a younger kid. Like, yeah. The kind of, because again, he's like kind of awkward and like nervous around her, but he's like really cares about her, and so it feels more like the younger Lucas that we knew.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like this scene a lot. I like, for all the same reasons we kind of just talked about with Miss Kelly. Like, I like that he's maybe he isn't saying the right things. Like, I don't have a problem necessarily with what he's saying, but that's mostly because I feel like even if it's not the right stuff to say, I feel him not knowing what to say, but he is worried and he doesn't want to lose. He's like, it's been a year, you're still struggling, and I want to help, and I don't know how, but so I'm just going to tell you that I'm worried. Like, I feel that so hard because I've been on that side of the conversation too.
Yeah. And like, of course, no disrespect to Jenna or her reading. I really, really like his reaction to, oh, there must be something wrong with me because I broke up with you. And he's like, no.
Oh, I love that.
Like, to me, that, again, feels very much in line with who Lucas is as a person. And I think it's very admirable because there are a lot of people who would be like, well, especially at that age, would be like, well, you broke up with me, therefore I'm not going to want to be close to you anymore. But Lucas is like, I still care about you even though you broke up with me.
Well, and that also harkens back to season 2, because one of the things I said in that second season was I like that they are friends first.
Yeah.
It's a relationship that is founded in friendship. That's one of the reasons that's why I love their relationship so much.
So I like this scene.
And I love the fact that, you know, I mean, for lack of a better term, I like that we see, based on the cut of her once she goes into the bathroom, how like hard she is masking. Like just masking how upset she is, because she's like, I'm fine. It's like she's really not.
Yeah.
And I don't like blame her for hiding it in any way. It makes complete sense. I did a lot of that. I still do a lot of that. Like I found that really effective. That jarring cut, just seeing her grip the sink before we go up to her face.
Yeah.
Just, it was a good cut. I like it.
Well, and especially like, you know, and we know just how much she lied to Miss Kelly because she's not doing fine. She's, you know, constantly agitated, as we see in the office. And then Miss Kelly says something about, so no more headaches. And she's like, yeah, I feel great. And then she's like popping the Tylenol.
And that's actually a really great, you know, they get in the exposition, but in a way that doesn't feel like an expo dump at all.
Yeah.
Oh, and just one little last note about Lucas and Max. The fact that she says, "What are you, stalking me?" I both like and don't like that, because like that was her nickname for him.
Yeah.
But the fact that she says, like, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Again, you might tell me I'm giving them too much credit, but that the idea that she says it not as like a joke or a reference is like further demonstrating like kind of their separation. That it's like she just says it like that without any kind of like context of the fact that or seeming acknowledgement of the fact that that's what she used to call him.
Yeah.
So, which makes me sad, but again, in a way that like that it's the idea.
Yeah.
Just feels very true to life, all of that whole section. But that shifts us into Chrissy's hallucination. So I think this was the scene that I felt was like properly scary. This was the first time I was like genuinely kind of scared.
Yeah.
For her. And some of the stuff that gets said.
Oh boy.
I mean, I'm not going to repeat it.
Yeah.
But it's dark.
Yes. What Chrissy goes through is so dark.
Yeah, it's brutal.
I mean, Stranger Things is not, doesn't shy away from dark material. But, in contrast to what I said about the Angela stuff just not feeling like they did their research, this kind of feels like they did.
I would agree with that. Yeah. And then we meet Eddie. Now, I will say that regardless of what I'm about to say about the rest of this scene, I actually really like that transition. Again, it's not a like oneer, but it's a great transition with them bringing in his voiceover of reading the article under that scene. Beautiful. Love it. It's so simple, but so effective. Brilliant. I love it. Like it's not a fancy trick. It's just an L cut. That's all it is. And it's perfect. But yeah, I don't love his introduction.
I don't either. I feel less weird about it now than I did a year ago, but I still don't love it.
Yeah, it's weird because I feel like I'm almost the opposite. I find that the more I watch this scene, the less I like it. There are pieces of it I like. And of course, just for context, I'm not talking about the game. I'm talking about when we first meet him in the cafeteria.
Yeah, when he's acting all ridiculous. I think they were still finding his character when he was doing his like whole obnoxious bit. So like there's a lot about his introductory scene that does feel very like central to his character, like some of his like vocal quirks and his like being over the top. But what is missing from that opening sequence with Eddie that is not missing in pretty much any other scene that he's in throughout the rest of the season is there's a great deal of warmth to Eddie.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons that he is so popular is he is an outcast. He is a smartass. He is obnoxious, but he has such a warm heart and we just don't get to see that. He's a little more cynical. He's defensive. He's a little more aggressive. He doesn't treat Mike and Dustin with the tenderness that especially he treats Dustin through the rest of the season. So I think that's why it's jarring in a lot of ways.
So, well, it's not even just the way that he treats them. It's the way that they approach him.
Right.
And I love the way you said that about the warmth, because that's it. Which is why, like, I want to make it clear, in case it wasn't clear from our previous episodes, we love Eddie.
Oh, yes.
That's why I don't like this scene, because this does not feel representative of the character. So before I get into the details of what I don't care for, the things I like his little like mini monologue. I actually don't mind him reading the article. That's cute. That's funny. Yeah. But the later when he talks about like working towards walking the stage, I mean, I have a shirt that says 86 baby because I am a literal 86 baby. I was born in 86. So I find that amusing just because reasons. But also, like, I think that's a moment where, like, Quinn's just natural charisma came out. Like, yeah. So that's, like, a moment where we get this little glimmer of, like, of that. And I like, everybody loves them. You know, the moment that's on all the that's on a lot of the t-shirts is the one where he's making the demon face to Jason. Yeah. But the moment I actually like better is right after that, when he lowers his hands and he just smiles at Jason. Like, that's the effective move to me. Yeah. Like, I am so not afraid of you, dude. Yeah. And so to me, that's the moment I really like. And I like the other members of the club. But other than that, I don't like the way that Eddie shoves Mike and Dustin around. I don't like that. I don't like the way he throws them around, literally throws them at the end when he's like, go find a like, I don't really have any like intellectual reason for that. I just don't like it. Like he does, even when he and Dustin are like fighting later on, like, I'm like, that is a different relationship than this.
Yeah.
I also and this is just me being in my feelings, I hate the way he scares that girl when he jumps down off the table. A girl is just walking by. She did nothing to Eddie.
Yeah.
She's like an average looking girl. She's got glasses. She looks like she's probably, like, I think she has like a tweed jacket on or something. Like, she's clearly supposed to be coded as a nerd.
She's coded as a normie, I think.
And Eddie jumps down and scares her. I don't have any respect for Eddie in that moment, particularly then when he smiles and lets the cheerleaders walk by.
Yeah.
And then, this like just absolute adamant idea of like, no, we can't postpone. Like, again, that's part of D&D culture, at least my understanding of it. So it's just, I don't know, just the showmanship of it goes, I guess, a little too far for me. So just those particular elements, it's not a lot, but they carry a lot of significance and weight for me. So, now granted, again, I think the rest of the characterization of Eddie works wonders, because to me, this is the outlier.
Right. I
also, again, having the hindsight of the rest of the season, I don't like how much they're forecasting his death.
Yeah.
And that's not a I don't like Eddie thing. Or I don't like Ed the way that they portray him in this scene thing. It makes me like the scene as a whole that much less. I mean, which is weird because I definitely didn't see it that way when we watched it the first time. It didn't feel, I mean, now it feels like the 2 days to retirement. I mean, I mean, I know some people called it. I didn't, but it's very, very visible now. All of that said, that Mike and Dustin looking for the replacement for Lucas. I love that Mike asks Nancy too.
Yes.
Like, I mean, the scene is cute, but it's like, I mean, again, like, she used to play with them, you know, as evident in season 1 when they reference it. But I mean, she doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
But I still thought it was cute that he thought to ask her.
Yeah.
And they find Erica. They bring her in. As I recall, when again on that first viewing, I think I was even like, do you know where this is headed? And you were like, I don't think. And then I think you figured it out like right before Erica's reveal. Because I think I was doing the like, it's going to be so great. It's going to be Erica.
Yeah.
You know, and it is. It's fantastic. The Star Spangled Banner in slow motion with them walking down the hall.
Her wearing that ridiculous flag. Erica.
And then we get, I mean, this is the face-off between she and Eddie. I listed it as one of my favorite scenes, and it still is. Although, when I watched it and was taking notes and looking at it more critically, I kind of had a new thought, and it brought up some interesting observations. So, on the one hand, I do like the sentiment of the girl isn't allowed in our boys' club, like not as a rule. Just I like the idea that it's present in this scene. Even though it's never stated outright. Like, it's absolutely at play here, however understated, whether they intended it or not. And while in a way I don't think it's period accurate that they would not state that explicitly, I appreciate that Eddie doesn't, or that any of the other Hellfire Club members, like, that none of them say it, because, like, it makes the point without belaboring it. And also, like, if they had said it, I feel like that would be another thing that they would have a really hard time coming back from.
Yeah.
Just in terms of likability. You know, they focus on her age instead, you know, and as you pointed out in our reaction episode, her lack of D&D familiarity, that they presume that she has never played before. However, I actually don't think that this is what happened, but I found myself going, wait a minute, is he just testing her? Was the whole thing of absolutely not? Like, was that in earnest, or was it a test? And I found that the idea of that being an act, and that he was ready to accept her the whole time, like if that's what they were going for, I found that idea was really unpleasant to me. Like, it feels like that would be so stereotypical of like the sexism that normally comes with moments like this. like, the girl can't possibly know anything about the boys club thing. She has to prove that she can hang, you know, and once she does, it's all good.
Oh, yeah, you like Metallica, name 5 of their albums.
Yes. You know, this idea of what can you take? You know, how thick is your skin? And I mean, while I do very much enjoy that Erica is unfazed by Eddie's bravado, I would not have minded either if she had rolled her eyes, like, at some point in the scene and been like, I don't have time for this, and threatened to walk, you know, as if she's saying, my worth is not dictated by you or your little boys club. So if Eddie isn't sincere in his rejection at first, and it's all just a, you know, quote unquote test, and his smile at the end of the scene is really what he was, you know, is saying, is like showing that this is what he was hoping for, expecting all along, it kind of sours the moment for me a little bit. But, you know, the whole thing changes if Eddie is in earnest with the initial absolutely not, because then it means that Erica actually changes his mind. And in walking through this sort of thought exercise, it actually makes me like his introduction a little bit more. Then this ends up being a bookend to that, because he's like throwing all his, you know, power and his bravado all around the cafeteria. Erica's the first person to stand up to him and win. And so that's the reason he's like, dope, let's do this. Yeah. You know, so that, like I said, that makes me like his introduction. It makes that interpretation of the character in that context at least make more sense. Like, there was a reason for it. I still don't enjoy watching it because it still doesn't feel like Eddie to me. Yeah. But at the same time, like, if that is what's happening here, and I think it is, I think this is like the read I'm going to go with. I like that kind of Erica ends up being the person who kind of, in tandem with the scene with Chrissy, Erica ends up being part of maybe that initial character growth. Yeah. And I like that. That, like, really warms my heart. And then just as a, like, final note on this scene, I also appreciate the fact that the framing does not cheat Bria Ferguson's height, or Joseph Quinn's for that matter. Yeah. Erica is shorter than Eddie by a lot. Yeah. You know, she's young, she's female, and Ferguson's performance and charisma are all you need for her to shine. I think cheating her height would have actually detracted from the fact that she's the smallest and youngest person in that room, and yet holds the most power in that moment. Yeah.
Being a short queen myself, I am a huge not fan of cheating actors' height. Like, even the thing, like, they gave Robert Downey Jr. those, like, massive platform wedges when he was playing Iron Man. And, like, I saw pictures from the set, and everybody was like, ha ha. And I was like, in my feelings about it. Yeah. Because I was like, Tony Stark is Tony Stark. He does not need to be tall to be Tony Stark. You do not need to put Robert Downey Jr. in, like, stripper heels in order for him to have the energy to command a room. It's just not, let people have their height.
Yeah, there's a great video actually by the YouTuber Jill Barup, who talks about combat wedges as, like, the worst piece of costuming, particularly for women. And she talks about that. Well, and she specifically highlights how usually they do that because it's hard to get the shots to look like, if you're having them all stand in a line, like, it's tough. But and who knows, they may have had Ferguson standing on an apple box in that profile two shot of them in the Hellfire Club room. But if they did, I mean, but I doubt it, because Eddie is leaning over her. Yeah. Like, he's kind of towering over her on purpose. So if they lifted her a little bit so that they were closer together, it doesn't look like they did that, like, because she still looks so much smaller than him. Yeah. Because she is. Yeah. And they're trying to highlight the fact that she is. And part of the reason that I appreciate it as well is because it's like, you know, side note, they're screwed if she doesn't play. Like, Eddie puts all this emphasis on this idea of, like, well, it's on you and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, all of his planning as DM would have gone down the drain too, along with the players probably getting a TPK most likely. So they all need her, or they have to postpone and they're back to square one. But, like, that's another reason why that scene in the cafeteria was irksome to me, because it's kind of like, if you don't play, you did all that work for nothing, my dude. So yeah, and I feel like Erica walks into that space knowing that.
Yeah, Erica's not going to go anywhere or do anything not knowing her worth.
Yep. And oh my God, her monologue is so good.
And the more I learn about D&D, like, the more I can appreciate the monologue.
And I'm gonna say it for Jenna because, you know, she's not here, but like I still love that she, you know, pointed out to me that, you know, Erica named her character after a My Little Pony character.
Oh my God.
Perfection.
Yeah. That is so good.
It's so good. Again, what you just said, she knows her worth. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I'm not going to, I mean, even the way she looks at Eddie when she's like, my name is Lady Applejack. She's just like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, she's just, like I said, unfazed by his bravado.
Yeah.
And I love that.
And Jo Quinn's reactions to her are fantastic. But watching this time, I was like knowing everything that was going to happen. I was more able to appreciate like the other players who also have a like stand back kind of moment, and they're like, oh, she's a level 14, you know,
and she's standing up to Eddie.
Yeah.
And he's not like yelling at her, like getting like like it's a great moment. But then like once they finish that introduction and welcome to Hellfire, they shake hands, and then the basketball match and D&D session play out simultaneously, and the Sinclair siblings get to both lead the charge. I still love that. Mm-hmm. So great. We get more about Vecna, and they mention Kaz, which I'm not going to talk about the Kaz theory as regards Eddie yet. I'm going to save that for the end of the season.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I do love the portrayal of D&D through the sequence, even if it is a little overly dramatic. And I've certainly never done a timeout like that. That's a stretch.
We need to do that to Ben at some point. Just be like in the middle of combat. Just be like, time out. Get the whole party to like go behind the couch and like huddle and talk and just like confuse the hell out of Ben for like no reason. I really think that they were just trying to make the parallel, you know. And again, like so much of what I have learned about Dungeons and Dragons is a lot of things do depend on your DM. Mm-hmm. Some DMs will in combat not let you stand around and debate about strategy and what you're going to do and so on and so forth. Ben is very lenient about that. But based on some of the things that were said at lunch and then some of the things that happen like in the session, I think Eddie's a little bit of a hard ass.
Oh, yeah. But at the same time, maybe the reason he's letting them do this in this moment, that he maybe is extending a moment of leniency, is because they are sailing perilously close.
Oh my God,
to a TPK.
I know.
And the fact that it's like it is the final game.
Yeah.
They're in their final session. They're like, I mean, because even though Erica crit hits, most of that party is down.
Yeah, TPK stands for Total Party Kill. If there are any folks out there who don't play Dungeons and Dragons.
You know, since we first watched this and now you started playing D&D, I finished a campaign for the first time. And so I've been in that situation now. And I remember at the time that we watched it thinking, well, like not feeling the stakes of your character dying.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I got it, but now, like, having played through a scenario like that, my character almost died. She didn't. She made it out. I was actually really proud. I got to land the death blow. It was great. But I mean, and now speaking of like allowing you to take the time, my DM, Mike, he was like really doing a great job of not pushing me. But like, I mean, I stalled. I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like I had two options and I'm like, I had frozen, and he was doing a really wonderful job of not like pushing me.
Yeah.
But he was like, but you need to make a decision. And so I did. I was like, all right. But I mean, I assumed that when I made the choice to attack, I thought my character Prudence, I thought she was done for. I was like, this is a suicide move. But I was like, but if I can, even if I just do some bit of damage and take off another like couple of hit points, like then someone else can kill him. So yeah, the stakes of that, like, I mean, I think when we were talking about it off mic, I was like, I didn't want Prudence to die. And you were like, you'd been with her for 4 years. Like, of course. And it's like, yeah, it becomes like a character that, you know, it would be like any of these characters in this show dying, you know, except that there's almost a more personal connection with it because you have been playing them.
Yeah.
I'm now prompted to want to ask some of my actor friends like who play D&D if and I might, because I have one coming on in a few episodes actually.
Hey.
But yeah, overall, again, like talk about a contrast to season 3. Like the way they treat Dungeons and Dragons in this season is just, I mean, all of the conversation we're having, like nothing like what came before. And that's one of the reasons why all of this stuff is so much like what I love most about season 4, because I was so personally like irritated by the tonal shift that they made with, and the treatment of D&D that they did in season 3. But I did think it was cute that there's a roll of 11. It was like, cute. And I don't know if you caught this. I like that Dustin is kind of the party leader, not Mike. I like that. I was like, okay. I mean, no disrespect to Mike, but I mean, it makes total narrative sense at this point. I mean, I've said it before that Dustin, I think in one of our reaction episodes, I said Dustin's kind of emerged as sort of the new sort of main character in this group. Yeah. And I like that this game reflects that. It's a good example of what I mean by that. They don't explicitly state it, but like the blocking, like he's the one in the center. And the fact that he makes the final call, like I think that indicates that he's earned that sort of place as party leader. Yeah. We could barely take the suspense.
I know. We knew exactly what was going to happen and we were like, ah.
And even Nancy is happy that the Tigers win.
Yeah, I thought that was cute.
And kind of following up with some of our conversation from earlier, I'm genuinely happy for Lucas when he gets hoisted into the air. Like, even with what happens with the team later, I don't begrudge him this moment. I love this. Yeah. And yet I also really feel for him. I mean, we talked about this moment a little bit already, but when he sees Hellfire Club, you know, that feeling of separation and conflicted emotions, like, you know, they weren't there at the game, but he also wasn't part of their session either. It's like, it's such a really good moment of like that high school coming of age thing. Like angst. Which is that thing that you go through of like, I guess going in a new direction means maybe leaving some things behind. Like and that's not ultimately what happens with Lucas, but I like the way that it's presented. Yeah. And I love that Max was listening to the radio.
I know. I mean, on the one hand, like, she's such a little shit. Like, she should have just gone to the game. But, you know, on the other hand,
she still cares.
She absolutely cares.
I just love it so much. Like, she can't manage it yet.
No, she can't. But we love Max.
Yes, we do.
And Max is one of those people who uses sarcasm as a shield, but who absolutely cares about everything, including the neighbor's dog.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Because she goes outside to feed that dog and happens to see Eddie and Chrissy. Speaking of whom. You like that transition?
Yeah. Yeah, we have not discussed the scene that launched 2,500 fics. As of today. I just saw something about it that, like, you know, they had crossed that that line. Yeah. There are other ships that have more fics, but they were just talking about it today.
Yeah. The scene is pretty tremendous. You know, I mean that scene starts first with her hallucination. You know, the grandfather clock, the spiders, just yikes. I mean, I think the short version is the scene is brilliant.
It's incredible. The chemistry between the actors is incredible. The energy that they bring to it, it's lightning in a bottle.
It's almost like a short film. Almost.
Yeah. And this is the scene where we just get that warmth like overflowing from him. Because from the very first exchange in their conversation where he walks up to her, and I don't think he was trying to scare her, but then he notices her. He's so good at reading her and says, "Are you okay?" And you can tell that he really means it. And then, you know, they sit down and they start to do like the whole conversation, and he gets nervous and defensive and is like, "I'm going to walk away." And she just goes, "I don't want you to go." That's different from saying, "No, it's okay. No, I really do want to buy it," or "Let me just get my money out," or something like that. Like, she's literally saying, "Please stay. I don't want you to go." And he reacts to that like very authentically. Like, he takes her at her word and he takes her at her meaning, not just at her word. And it's like, it's so intuitively done. And then you have the whole thing where he's like silly to try to make her feel better, and the flirting. And I love everything about the whole scene.
I mean, and I think I might have cut it out of our reactions episode, but I think something I said was, I like how, in a way, like, she's clearly feeling like nervous, and like you said, he's reading that, and he ends up giving her space. You know, he's being silly, But in so doing, he's backing away from her to give her some like physical space.
Yeah.
And then once she relaxes a little more and she remembers him and they start to have a natural conversation, that's when he comes back to the table.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really, like, this is a scene that they make look effortless.
Yeah.
And there is so much work happening here. Like in terms of the blocking, I mean, the little micro gestures that they're doing, like I guarantee that was probably workshopped. And if it wasn't, then wow. But just the fact that like it all looks so, you're not seeing any of the stuff that you're not, the seams are totally invisible. And I just, it's great. It's so great. Comparatively, this is a scene that gets better every time I watch it.
Yeah.
And I remember one of your quotes that I'd like to maybe revisit now when you said, like, Chrissy was a really interesting character. She's like, hey, can you give me horse tranquilizers? Because I need a nap.
Yeah. There's so much opportunity for so much complexity there. There's so much complexity that's already there with the darkness of her visions versus how she treats Eddie. I mean, one of the reasons that I love this scene so much is he says, you know, I thought you'd be kind of mean and scary too. And the way she just delivers, me? Oh my God, it's the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. And, you know, she really means it. And she really is very, like, even though she's going through so much, like she's being tormented. She's about to be murdered from her own mind, but she's still very gentle with him. And I think that really says something so interesting about her as a person and her potential as a character. And, you know, I just like, fuck Vecna. That's my conclusion.
Yeah. I love too Eddie's little line. There's so many little lines in that scene though that I really enjoy, but one of them in particular is the way he says you got to start somewhere. I don't know why, because it's like that's not like a new sentiment, but there's just something about the way I've never heard it stated quite in that way.
Yeah,
but and just his delivery of it, it's one of those like little details. Again, this is the close reading stuff that we do. I just really love that particular line. Now I will say, later on in his trailer, I do like the little note that he stops to say hello to his guitar.
Yes.
She starts to hallucinate. Vecna gets her.
Yeah.
He watches her die. I remember that I don't know that I was scared exactly. Like, this still carries a different energy than the scene in the bathroom to me. I was scared during her vision. As she was dying, it was more like, what is happening?
Yeah.
What is this? And in a way, I almost kind of, I mean, I'm not happy to watch her die by any means, but I remember thinking they've definitely gotten my attention. Like, I want to know what's happening so that we can kill it.
Yeah. I mean, I think my impression was, this is so horrible. You know, because I got so invested in Chrissy so quickly.
Yeah.
And not from oh, I'm pissed off they did this, or they should have done it differently. The way I very much am about other things in the season. This is so horrible. It was just like, it was so effective. And it was so sad. It was so sad because it didn't have to be that way for her. And again, I mean that without criticizing that she was killed off as a character.
Yeah.
You know, she suffered in a way that she didn't have to. She didn't deserve it, and it's just sad in a very effective way.
Yes.
And I stand by what I said from the reactions. I very, very much wish that they hadn't killed her, just because I like her so much. But I'm not criticizing that they killed her, because this is very standard for when you have a monster like Vecna who is targeting specific people and so on and so forth. Like, her death raises the stakes in a really incredible way. Of course, her death has a profound effect on Eddie, which we'll get to, but the performances were spectacular. The scene setting, like, I remember, like, when she's looking out the window and she just sees the fog and then the sound around her starts to change. Like, all of that is so effectively done.
Yeah.
But it's violent and it's horrible and it's brutal. But yeah, it is done in a very, very effective way. And honestly, I think that's such a contrast with the cold open, the massacre in the cold open, because that also was done effectively, but in a way that took me out.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Experience.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
And this didn't, because there is no analog for that happens in nature for what's happening to Chrissy.
Right. That's true.
So yeah, it was so well done, and Quinn's performance of watching her die was just so, again, so terrible, but exactly as you would expect.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this here rather than in the next episode. Of course he ran.
Yeah. He couldn't save her.
Exactly. Like, this is one of the reasons why the cow, and I'm saying it here because this is the moment that he runs. So I'm talking about it now. What bothers me about cowardice arcs, I mean, actually, like, comparing this, I mean, I know I've done it kind of tangentially, but I'm going to reference specifically now the scene when we talked about Steve running back in to save Jonathan.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between those two is that Steve could do something.
Mm-hmm.
And you just said it. There's nothing Eddie could have done.
No.
Nothing. And to present it as if they're the same somehow, even in the sense that Eddie somehow thinks that gets under my skin. Like, it's just, I don't know. I wrestle with that. I wrestle with that a lot. Yeah. Even though I just said this scene does make me lean in. I think you articulated it a lot better, but it makes me want to find out more rather than scaring me off. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, I feel like to say I enjoy it is a bit of a stretch, but I think given following what you were saying, that's what I mean. Yeah, I mean, and this scene also has like on rewatch value, it's very different because now knowing that they both don't make it out of this season and knowing how it's awful for him. Like, it's awful what's happening to her, but he's witnessing it.
Yeah.
And for the character, it is real. And and applying this whole cowardice arc for him,
it's bullshit.
It's unfair.
So first of all,
so unfair.
It's absolute bullshit. Eddie feeling survivor's guilt and feeling guilt and shame for having run is totally normal, totally natural. The problem comes in when the narrative as a whole treats it as if his trauma response to watching someone be brutally murdered is valid.
Precisely. Someone needed to say, it's okay that you ran.
Someone needed to say, the only thing that happened, like, what were you supposed to do? Just stand there and be like, get me next?
Exactly.
You had no idea what kind of opponent you were fighting. You had no weapon. If you had stayed, you'd be fighting against a monster that literally is not on the same plane of existence as you. Like, he could have called 911, I guess, and then been arrested.
Exactly, yeah.
And so he could not have even held her and comforted her as she was dying because she was not conscious.
So I don't know if maybe that's the reason that I've never, I don't know, call me a wet blanket, but I've never liked the Chrissy Wake Up song.
No, I hate it. And other people can have fun, but
yeah.
I hate it.
I can't disassociate it with, and I get that maybe that's what people are doing. They're trying to take this moment of horror and bring some levity to it, but I can't get past the horror part. But all of that said, I still find that as an ending to an episode, it's powerful.
Yes.
And compelling.
Yes.
And yeah, that's the end of our first episode of season 4. Final thoughts.
I think the only thing that really comes to mind for me is that episode 1 is kind of a good predictor of the rest of the season, and that it is such a mixed bag, because there are some things that are really great. Like the whole shenanigans between Joyce and Murray where, like she's trying to break this doll open and he's like, being ridiculous and talking about, what is it, jujitsu?
I don't remember.
That he takes. I think karate. And the fact that he like puts ice in a glass and then pours himself a drink and then he gets into the ice bath, finishes off his drink and then tosses the ice into the bath. Yep. Something about that gets me every time. And when she is, taking the clothes off the doll, she goes, ugh, it has nipples.
And then that's when he gets in the bath. Yeah. It's a low-hanging fruit joke, but it's funny.
Yeah, no, like, it's but just their dynamic, and that he's so concerned for her when he thinks that something might have happened.
Yes, that's true.
And yeah, like I love that whole exchange.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I have to say the transitions, both in camera and on-set blocking and camera work, mingled with the editing, is top freaking notch. I mean, visuals coming out the gate strong this season. Like, it's such a massive accomplishment given how many moving pieces there are in this episode. And the visuals carry so much of this, so much of the responsibility of this. I mean, the writing too, but I think the visuals really help. There's so much. Like, it's amazing to me how not confusing the episode is.
Yeah.
And, like, it's just how many characters there are to establish, all in their own right and in relation to one another, without being ham-fisted or overdone. Like, I think that's an interesting, like, counterpoint to the mixed bagness of it all. Mm-hmm. Like, it is a mixed bag, but at the same time, I think this is true as well. And the episode never feels overwhelming. There are pieces of it that I don't enjoy and that I don't really like the choices that they made, but it doesn't feel, again, it doesn't feel confusing. It doesn't feel like I can't keep track of who's where and what's going on. It's all very clear. It's just, that is so impressive to me. Again, given the size of the cast, the scope. I mean, granted, I think a lot of that comes from the fact that we don't see anything of Hopper yet.
True.
I don't know, moving forward, it's going to be interesting to see if this continues as far as like the coherence, if that's a word, of the storytelling, if that persists once we involve Russia. But my memory is that it does. And yet I say that, but I will be surprised if any of the rest of the episodes top, I think, the visual landscape of this episode. Like the visuals stood out to me in particular on that first rewatch. And it seems like that's a pretty common reaction from a lot of like other Stranger Things podcasts, just the fandom in general. Like a lot of people talk about, like, I am not the first to say how much I like the visuals, but yeah. I think in particular just how effective they are in conveying all of the moving parts.
Yeah.
And so so with that said, I do want to credit the cinematographer for this episode, Caleb Heyman, who is the DP for many of the episodes this season. So it'll be interesting to see how the style changes and or persists as we go. And also I want to shout out the editor for this episode, Dean Zimmerman. He's a Stranger Things veteran editor who edited a handful of episodes in seasons 1 and 3 and edits all but one episode this season.
Oh, okay.
Even with all of the stuff with Eddie and Max to come, like, I still feel that feeling of I like this better than the first episode of season 3, that is still true. I still think this is a much better episode than Susie, Do You Copy? I think the characterization is far more on point. It felt more like Stranger Things, at least at this point. Even with all of those, the pieces that we didn't jive with, maybe, like I said, because the Hawkins stuff is so strong, it helps carry a lot of the rest of the stuff with it. And it spends a lot of time catching us up with characters just living their lives. And that almost works in its favor. Like the fact that so much of it is not connected to Vecna and not connected to even the Hawkins lab, like with Elle's stuff, like that picks up more, I think, in the next episode. But at this point, most of what we're seeing is just like, here's where everybody is. Here's what's going on for everybody. And then at the end, they drop the mic. Boom. Thought you were safe, huh? I mean, Chrissy has her visions and whatnot. Like, not all is well, but it felt like a gut punch because it is. You've been lulled into a sense of relative security, and I think in that way it is a big contrast to the second season because it took a lot longer in season 2 to get there, and I think that's what a lot of viewers responded really well to in this season is that we get there faster. I still don't have a problem with it personally in season 2. I think it works really well, but I think that's why they brought it in earlier, but it works. It absolutely works.
Yeah.
Structurally, it's a very strong start, and that was and still is a relief.
Yes.
Well, that then is going to conclude our contemplation on Chapter 1, The Hellfire Club. As always, thank you for listening, and if you've got comments, questions, thoughts, you can join the conversation. We're on TikTok and Instagram. Links are in the show notes. And you can even shoot us an email. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please consider leaving us a review. Coffee and Contemplation is available wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining me, Heidi.
You are very welcome.
And thanks again for all of you listening. And until next time, over and out.
Over and out. Somebody just asked me super recently. They were like, so how do you win Dungeons and Dragons? And I was like, well, you get to the end of the campaign and you don't die. And he was like, so how do you lose Dungeons and Dragons? I was like, if everybody fucking dies.
Yeah.
And that was how I was like, so basically what D&D is a bunch of nerds sitting around a table telling each other a story.
Yeah.
Using dice.